For me, teaching is the noblest of professions. Without amazing teachers, our future is in jeopardy, quite honestly. Because this is where the next generation of everything is going to come from. And we're trying to produce the teachers that will make sure kids that have so much that they bring to the classroom won't slip through the cracks.
For the past 20 years, Noyce has helped develop a really deep understanding of what excellent K-12 STEM education looks like. Noyce as a program really equips K-12 STEM teachers to have that knowledge and to use that knowledge to the benefit of all the students that those teachers touch.
We started with a relatively small program that people maybe thought, well, let's just give out some scholarships. But we shaped it, and the institutions that received the awards shaped it into a huge program with many unique aspects, expanded throughout the country. Many institutions have been brought in at all levels.
As an educator, I'm able to work with my colleagues in the math department and the environmental science department to support bringing in educators who want to continue to grow as scientists, but also want to grow as educators. So those collaborations and those partnerships that are built between the colleges of education and our science partners really does elevate that teaching profession.
We often put a lot of emphasis on pre-service teacher preparation, and I like to put equal emphasis on teacher retention, but also on developing teachers who are already our exemplary teachers in the field. But most recently, we also said, let's take a look at the research aspect of the work that we're doing around Noyce in terms of preparing and retaining effective teachers.
Noyce scholars have a high retention rate. Among ours, we have about 85% out of our 192 that have been through our program. And they're still teaching in high-need schools, some of them at school districts that are severely economically disadvantaged, and they are doing a phenomenal job impacting the lives of so many secondary school students.
Having a Noyce program, in a way, serves as an attractant for institutions to have much more diverse populations come into their programs. Knowing that this program aims to provide quality teaching for high needs areas will often attract people who come from rural areas, who come from urban areas, people from minoritized populations, people from other groups that see that there's an opportunity here to make a difference.
The main things that the Noyce program does, it serves to remove barriers to entry. We have a serious access problem. We have a serious college debt problem. For students who are coming from backgrounds that are typically loaded up with debt, just coming to a four-year institution to complete a teacher certification program almost seems like a fantasy.
From my experience, the most important thing that Noyce provides to the STEM education is actually a sense of community. Once you're in Noyce, you're always a Noyce scholar. We have an impact of sustainability on our graduates. They know that we're here for them and we support them no matter what they are involved in through their life transitions.
The fact that we at AAAS get to be a part of providing a space where Noyce PIs and co-PIs can build community, where they can problem solve with each other around tough issues, it's just really an honor.
I think that it's a network that you can tap basically later on at any particular time, where you can share with other educators across the country, learn their challenges, learn their wins, basically learn their triumphs, and consider testing those things out in your space.
What we have learned is that, yes, programs are shaped by the funding agencies, or in many cases, Congress, but really they are brought to success and to fruition through the awardees. And I think what we did at NSF was we stepped back and allowed these institutions to do their thing. And they came up with very novel ideas, which then they were able to disseminate so that other institutions were able to pick up on some of the approaches.
When I think about impacts, I think about the number of teachers that the program has touched, and then the number of students and other teachers and colleagues that Noyce Scholars and Fellows have touched. I'll just take one institution, for example, that has, for instance, 20 scholars, I'll say, and then those 20 scholars go on to teach hundreds of children. And our hope and our expectation is that they take everything that they've learned from the Noyce program and make an impact not only with their students but with their colleagues as well.
In my mind, whoever thought about these programs 20, 30 years ago, I have to think that they were envisioning a kid like me. Leaving rural Georgia, Alabama State, Hampton University, Virginia Tech, now at the University of South Alabama, where I have multiple NSF projects, full professor within science education. I have to think that those programs were in part to give kids like me, a little small boy from rural Georgia, an opportunity. And so 20, 30 years from now, there are going to be some other full professors out there.
I'm a Star Trek fan, and I like to think about what does STEM education look like 200 years from now? We're zipping around the galaxy. But if we think about 20 years from now, I would like us to be working in a college debt-free, free tuition environment. If anybody who wanted to become a STEM teacher could become a STEM teacher.
The more we can invest in teachers, in bringing individuals who have strong backgrounds into the teaching profession, we will continue to strengthen the field of education, heighten the profession. It's not easy to be a teacher today.
I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. I am of an age that I lived in the segregated South, in the Jim Crow South. I only ever went to schools that were all black. I only ever had teachers who were all black. I lived through the civil rights era of the time, and in Birmingham, that included some pretty difficult times. I was captivated by Sputnik. I went to the University of Washington, which was a long way from Birmingham, and had to find my own place in science. So I understand how teachers can make a difference. I understand how teachers can inspire, how teachers can support, and how they can help students to see beyond the environments where they may find themselves, to be able to look at a much bigger world and much bigger possibilities.
I hope that we can continue to help teachers who can unleash the potential of so many of our students in the schools who really just need that teacher that would make it a point to speak to students on a one-to-one, like if, you answered this problem and solved this problem amazingly well. Have you ever thought about being an engineer? And have you ever thought about being a scientist?
As a physics teacher, I would say all forces occur in pairs, right? You get object A acts on object B, and object B acts on object A. When you teach a student, the student teaches you. And I can think of no other profession out there where people have such monumental personal growth.
I am at heart a teacher. I think all of the principal investigators are teachers at heart. Obviously, our Noyce Scholars and Fellows are teachers at heart. And it takes a lot of heart to do this work. But if you think about the role of a heart in an organism, that's who our teachers are to our future.
Talent comes from all communities. And the talent to address the challenges that the world faces comes from all communities. And the Noyce program develops talent scouts.
Welcome. My name is Travis York, and I serve as the director of iSeed, supporting and coordinating all of AAAS's external diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility initiatives. It's a pleasure to be with you all tonight. And I am grateful for the continued support of our colleagues at the National Science Foundation and at each of the Noyce grantee institutions as we undertake the critically important task of cultivating our nation's cadre of STEM pre-K-12 teachers. I'd like to begin my welcome with a land acknowledgement. A land acknowledgement is provided at the beginning of a gathering by naming the traditional native inhabitants of the land in order to recognize and respect Native peoples and to cultivate deeper awareness of the history that has led to the present moment. As the son of a half Choctaw, quarter Cherokee man, I am proud to gather with you today, and we wish to greatly acknowledge the people whose ancestral homelands many of us live and work. Today we acknowledge that we are on the lands of the indigenous Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We pay our respect to the elders, both current, past, and the future. I'd also like to take a quick note to let you know that if you have not already done so, we would really love for you to download the Whova app. Have any of you not yet downloaded the app? So you see the way I asked that question? Not who has, but who hasn't? No. We wanted just to take a quick note to ask you or to remind you to please download the app. If you're looking for alternative ways of saying Whova, Kathleen Bergen is really the go-to on the myriad of ways to say the name of this platform. And the reason that we wanted to remind you to download the app is not only that it will help you navigate the conference, but in particular, for these plenary sessions, we'll be utilizing the Q&A function in the app to help direct your questions to speakers. So even for tonight's speaker, we'll be directing Q&A questions to Gloria for her to respond at a later time, and then we'll be getting those answers back into the app for you all. So I just wanted to make sure that we captured that for you. It is really an honor to welcome you all tonight, and I'm excited for the lineup that we have for the next several days. AAAS began its relationship with the Noyce community in 2008 with the organization of this now annual summit. Over the years, and with the creation of the Arise initiative, our partnership has evolved. With the Noyce community as a thought partner and collaborators, we've established a network to collect and share information about topics and strategies for research and evidence-based approaches to prepare STEM teachers, assess efficacy, couldn't get that one out, assess efficacy in STEM teaching, and understand effective ways to recruit, train, and retain quality STEM teachers. Schools across our country, especially those who educate our students often underserved or underrepresented in STEM careers, continue to be challenged by teacher shortages, making your Noyce programs critical to our path forward and to addressing the myriad of systemic issues that have led to this issue. Noyce projects are developing new approaches related to the preparation of teachers, to the retention and induction of early career teachers, as well as culturally relevant learning experiences and justice-centered STEM education. AAAS is helping to share these new strategies through our Arise blogs and webinars and through knowledge dissemination opportunities at this very summit, in our workshops and poster sessions. This is where I want to encourage you to participate fully in those knowledge dissemination opportunities. I know DC is a fun place, but we've ordered some extra heat over the next couple days just to try to keep you in this cool hotel, keep you focused on learning and growing. Now, we do hope that while you're here, you also get to take some time to relax and rejoice in community with one another. So while we hope you have an enriching next few days, we also hope that you expand your professional network. We hope that you get to celebrate all the hard work that you and your colleagues do. And remember to have some fun, because when we're having fun, we're also learning. There is much work to be done to address the teacher shortage before us. We have an unprecedented opportunity to support local, state, and federal leaders reconceptualizing of the American educational systems. Noyce awardees offer innovative ways to expand access into teaching professions, pedagogical advances for pre-service teachers that ensure high-quality training that support the academic and affective development of students from all backgrounds, and an ever-expanding understanding of the ways that Noyce scholars, fellows, and master teacher fellows can fundamentally improve the lives of students, their families, and ultimately their entire communities through the deliberate and thoughtful delivery of education. We must prioritize excellent teachers and their vital contributions to our societies. We must look towards the evidence-based models to provide these professionals the resources they and their students need and deserve. Educational research has made it abundantly clear that talent and capability are not correlated with a student's zip code, their ability status, gender, sexual orientation, race, or ethnicity. Rather, it is the range of viable pathways and structural opportunities or lack thereof afforded to persons that promote or preclude their contributions to the STEM enterprise. The simple truth is that we need more persons engaging in STEM from every walk of life and every corner of the country, and teachers are an essential part of that engagement. Now, it's my extreme pleasure to welcome to the stage a tireless advocate for teachers and for STEM education. Dr. James L. Moore III is the Assistant Director for the Directorate for STEM Education. Prior to his NSF appointment, Dr. Moore served for over 5 years as the university's Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion, Chief Diversity Officer, and leader of the Office of Diversity Inclusion at The Ohio State University. From 2015 to 2017, he served as the Program Director for Broadening Participation in Engineering in the Directorate for Engineering at NSF. And during that time, he was one of the program directors who helped launch the highly acclaimed cross-directorate NSF Includes program, an initiative that took over $100 million to broaden participation across the STEM initiative. Dr. Moore is nationally recognized for his work on African American males. He was the first executive director for the Todd Anthony Bell National Resource Center on the African American male and the inaugural EHE Distinguished Professor of Urban Education at The Ohio State University. His research agenda focuses on school counseling, gifted education, urban education, higher education, multicultural education and counseling, and of course, STEM education. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Moore to the stage.
Good evening. Come on, we can do better than that. Good evening. Wow, 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 wow. Oh, wow, I can see the muse in the room. I can see all the inquiring minds, and I can see the individuals who are committed to the excellence without excuses. You know, it's always a pleasure to be in the room with individuals who are shaping individuals who are going to serve our nation. Some of our true public servants are teachers. It's individuals like yourself that will help us to reclaim the importance and the significance of teachers all across America. See, it's very difficult to engage our democracy at a very high level if you're not afforded a quality education. Too many individuals all across the United States are not afforded a quality education. They don't have access to STEM courses where they can realize their dreams and aspirations. You can go in many of the most vulnerable educational spaces all across the United States. You can see in many ways malpractice that is taking place. We're going to lose a generation of young people because in many ways some of our educators, they were just like us, ideal, and they thought, just like we did when we were teachers, that we could change the world. We embraced the art and the science of teaching. We saw individuals who were learning at a very high level. We saw individuals who start to believe that they can achieve at a very high level. But over time, when work disappears, when resources flounder, when people start to devalue our profession, we saw a decay in our profession. But I'm hopeful. This message is not about a message of doom and gloom. It's a message of hope and inspiration. It's not just a moral imperative. It's an economic and national security imperative that we get this right. And I'm sure every day some of you all say, wow, this is tough work. I'm tired, I'm fatigued. But I want you to remember my words. It's important that we keep pushing ourselves that we reach the highest level of success in ourselves, and in turn, that it become infectious. So infectious that the people, the pre-service, the master teachers, the individuals that we mentor, that they become so inspired, so full, that they know that they can persist on. But we know one of the things about this program, certainly there's many grand challenges that this program is expected to address. See, within the Directorate of STEM Education, our budget is about $1.4 billion. I see numbers that I had never seen before. Certainly at my home institution, Ohio State, I thought I had a pretty big budget, but I realized it's like taking a 5-gallon bucket from the ocean and say I stole the ocean. But believe it or not, you could give me an additional $1 billion. And I'm not sure whether or not we'll be able to solve some of the grand challenges in this space. What makes me hopeful is that I have people who believe that they can be the tipping point. In turn, believing that they can be the tipping point, we know that it's important that we collaborate and we establish relationships, just like we ask our teachers to establish meaningful relationships with communities and their families, because we know that that makes a big difference. See, it's very important in our profession that not only we convince each other that this is worthy work to do, but it's important that we convince other sectors that it's very important to make investments in teacher education. At the National Science Foundation, we are vigilant in our quest to establish partnerships. And when I first came there, I said, well, why should we be establishing partnerships when we're the government and if we run out of money, all we got to do is just print more money? But it gives us an opportunity to fund more projects. It gives us opportunities to bring young people into the new frontier. See, my thing is, I'm not just trying to get people to just obtain a STEM degree. I want us to shape minds in a way that we bring them to the new frontier of STEM. It's very important that when we think about the Sputnik, we like to think about it's a full circle moment. The CHIPS and science legislation is sort of like a full circle, and it's all we're revisiting. If you go back and look at that literature, it's almost like we're rehashing the same thing that took place over 70 years ago. Full circle. What did we learn from it? How do we inspire? How do we get people in STEM? And so many people think to themselves, oh, we're not going to move the envelope. You know, I get people say, well, we're just not moving the envelope. And I said, but in science, we spend billions upon billions of dollars every year. And some research suggests between 5 to 15% is actually going to manifest into anything. We do it as humans because we believe that work could be the tipping point. It could be the thing that makes a difference. We have to continue to develop and incubate and develop exemplary practices that we can train people, educate people, prepare people to work in some of our most vulnerable educational spaces in America. See, at NSF, we're very interested in reaching the missing millions in STEM. And what do we mean by that? These are individuals who have not necessarily been inspired, cultivated, and supported for STEM opportunities. See, I'm a native of South Carolina, and all that I am, that I hope to be, is shaped by that experience. If my grandfather was living, and I'm the third, my son is the fourth, we would refer to my grandfather as the Black Aristotle. And one of the things he used to say to me, and it was almost, he was a master teacher. And he once said to me, the master teachers don't have to say anything. They teach by their very existence. So when Papa was going to speak, we knew we had to stop because he was going to give us a nugget. And he said to me, and I think about it in my day-to-day. He said, if you see suffering, you hear about it, or experience it, your life will never be the same. In my beloved South Carolina, in other places around the country, in the Delta region of Arkansas, in Mississippi, or the Black Belt of Alabama, or Gary, Indiana, or Chester, PA, or even in my state where my home institution, Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio, where work has disappeared. We see suffering at a very high level, where individuals are not able to realize their dreams and aspirations, not because they don't have the capability, but because they don't have always that same access to the same opportunities. I'm coming to a near close, but I want to leave something. I want to continue to inspire. So our director always say we need to inspire the missing millions, but I believe we need to inspire the people who are trying to reach the missing millions. We need people to see with their third eye when they see a young person, that they see that person could be the person that's going to be in the classroom, that's going to be a politician, that's going to be a scientist, who's going to solve some of the grand challenges of our time. I think it's very important that we recognize these things. And what I want you to remember, this. When I was in South Carolina about 2 months ago, they didn't know I was from South Carolina. And usually when I go to South Carolina, they don't think I'm there because my southern drawl, I guess, is more modified than theirs. But to make a long story short, I was talking to the state superintendent and the legislators who focus on education. And I'll never forget this, and this is what wakes me up every morning and saying we have to do something. We're going to continue to try to proliferate the number of teachers. But when I talk to people around the country, they kind of talk about it in future tense. That saddens me because we're going to lose a generation of people because they don't have access to the teachers that we're trying to produce. But this legislator said, Dr. Moore, I can't mock him the way he sounded, but just imagine a really thick Southern accent. He said, I have 900 kids in my district. I have one math teacher. And he said the highest math that you can take in my district is algebra. So it doesn't matter how smart these kids are or what their capability is. It's a high probability they won't have access from a traditional pathway to the flagship and the land grant of South Carolina. But this is not unique to South Carolina. These are things I saw in Ohio and some of my large urban areas. I saw in Appalachia, in southern Ohio. It is imperative that we get this right. I'm excited about AAAS partnering with the National Science Foundation to help us create a groundswell in this work. And I always give them kudos for being a partner in this work. Equally as important, we like to think the work that we do is noble, it's transformative, it's moving, it's fluid, it's inspiring. Each and every day I have the privilege, and I say the privilege, to walk into a building, to be hand in hand, metaphorically speaking, with my colleagues who embrace the noble work. And I ask my NSF beloved colleagues in the room to stand up so we can give them a hearty, hearty round of applause. And the reason why I'm saying this, because they always trying to squeeze every dime out of me because they know the moral imperative around this work. It's important. I want you to know when you don't think someone is in the trenches who's advocating for this work, I want you to know this group is always advocating for this work. Anything that comes to my desk around K-12, they always volunteering because guess what? They know the power, they know the transformative, the redemptive power that a teacher has in the classroom. I close on this because this is a momentous occasion, and I hope that I get to engage each and every one of you. But we're coming. We want you tell your students, we hear them. You tell the teachers that you work with, we hear them. We care. And we're not going to stop till we reach kids like in the district that I referenced early. Do we have all the answers? No. But I close on this, and many people have heard me say this before. I believe one of the greatest educators in the 20th century is from my beloved South Carolina. And he was a mentor to Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Some would argue, outside of his parents, he was probably the biggest influencer in his life. And his name is Dr. Benjamin E. Mays. And he says this, and I want you to think about it. And I want you to hold on to this. When you get weary and you get fatigued and you think you can't give him any more, I want you to remember these words. He says, whatever you do it so good that no woman, man, dead, alive, or yet to be born can do it better. That's the level of excellence we need all of us to strive for. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Enjoy your meeting.
Thank you, James. Every time I hear him speak, and I have the privilege of hearing him speak quite a bit, one, it's always new. There's no canned talks here. You're not hearing repeated, oh, that's what he said at IU's last year, or tip over there. No. And it's always enriching. Thank you, both for your leadership, your incredible team, and for your continued advocacy for this work. We really appreciate your partnership. James has retained more of his accent than I have. I'm also from South Carolina, but I don't know. If I'm talking to my mom, if you catch me talking to my mom in the hallway, you'll hear it come out. That's where it comes out. But I share that because you heard me earlier offer a land acknowledgement. You heard James so nicely model some of his own history and his personal story. And I want to actually encourage you all to ground yourselves in your stories and forefront your own stories, the stories that have brought you to where you are, to your positions, to your love of science, to your love of education, to your joys and your passions, because those are really powerful stories. And those make for really exciting conference days. And so we're going to continue to lift up those stories. And it's part of that. I want to also make sure that you connect some names to faces. And so I'm going to actually I'm going to call out some of our Noyce program officers who are here so that you can connect some names to faces. I know some of you may not have met all of your program officers, and they're going to be throughout the next several days, and they are incredible colleagues to connect with. I promise they do not mind you asking questions, even if it's like, could you fund XYZ? They're really, really good, in fact, at helping you think about where you could perhaps get funding for that or what you should consider. So we really want to make sure that you have an opportunity to connect with them. So first, I'm going to just call you all by name, and hopefully I have all of you that, I know not everybody is here, but I think I have all of you that are here. So Kathleen Bergen is right over here. Oh, yeah, let's clap for these incredible folks. I like that. We also have Jennifer Ellis. And Jennifer Lewis. Didn't I see Jennifer? There you are. Yep, Jennifer Lewis is right over here. James Alvarez. Patrice Waller. This gorgeous tangerine coat. I love that. Mindy Capaldi. Bon Green. Did I see Bon? Back here. Oh, yeah, nice. Full coverage of the room. Thank you, Bon. Kimberly Tanner. And did I see Julio Soto? No? Okay, I thought I had saw him. All right, so I wanted you to have a chance to see those program officers. Please, my very first program officer at NSF when I was an early faculty member many decades ago was Mark Letty. Some of you might have met him, also in the EDU, still a program officer, and I was so terrified to talk to my program officer. So terrified. I was like, I don't want to do something wrong and lose this funding for my institution. What I have learned over the years is that program officers are really your biggest advocate. So I just strongly encourage you, say hello, even if it's just, I just want to connect my face to your name. I encourage you to connect with the program officers, ask them questions, thank them for their incredible work. They don't accept gifts. That's against the rules. But maybe a word of encouragement that'll do. So, our next speaker has served as the Chief Executive Officer of AAAS and the Executive Publisher of the Science Family of Journals since January of 2020. He's also my boss and our fearless leader. So if you don't mind kind of giving him a really big round of applause, please welcome up Sudip Parikh.
Thank you, Travis. And he knows I don't expect a big round of applause. Who in the world put me on after Dr. Moore? My gosh. You remind me of something that somebody once told me, Dr. Moore. He said, I was told that, when you get a chance to speak in front of a group of people who are about to do important things, you have an obligation. You have an obligation because you're taking their time. And that obligation is that you have a duty to be profound. You must be profound because you're taking time from important people before they do important work. But everybody can't be profound. And so if you can't be profound, well, then you better be informative. Give them something to chew on while they do their important work. Then he looked at me and he said, but if you can't be profound and you can't be informative, then you better darn well be brief. And so tonight I'm going to be brief because Dr. Moore was profound. I do have the privilege of being the CEO of the American Association for the Advancement of Scientists. I'm not an educator. I'm a biochemist. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about why the AAAS is so invested in the work that you all are doing. And I'm going to start by talking about the sciences. And I'm going to tell you that, when I was a kid, I used to dream about what would it be like to live in one of the golden eras of science. What would it have been like to talk to Isaac Newton in the year that the apple fell on his head? What would it be like to hang out with Albert Einstein in 1905, the year he made 3 discoveries that could be Nobel Prize winning? What would it be like to live in the 1920s and 30s and hang out with the physicists working on quantum mechanics? Or in the 60s, hanging out with the people that worked on the dogma of biology, DNA to RNA to protein. And I used to think that, but after 3 years in this job, what I have realized is that this is the golden era of science. This moment that we are living in. You have never heard scientists talk about the possibility of cures before, but with gene editing and immunotherapy, scientists are talking about that. We have the ability to look back to the very beginning of the universe through the James Webb Space Telescope. We're looking at galaxies that formed 300,000 years after the Big Bang. We can inform our models of the Big Bang to an incredibly precise degree. We understand what's happening to the environment on our own planet at a level of detail that we've never had before, and it frightens all of us, or it should. So we have this tremendous level of understanding. We are living in a golden age of science. So then it brings to mind the question, what am I worried about? Well, all that is lagging indicators of the work of the Sputnik generation and the investments made by the federal government years ago. It's a lagging indicator. But if we're going to go to Mars, if we're going to cure cancers, if we're going to reduce extreme poverty, if we're going to mitigate climate change, we need the brain power of everybody in this great nation. And, I often pepper my speeches with talk about the Mississippi Delta or Appalachia or the Central Valley of California like Dr. Moore does, because it's true. It is true. We can't just pull on the geographic centers in the East and West. We have to pull across this country, across every identity, because we need that brain power, because we do have the opportunity. We do have the opportunity to visit Mars. We do have the opportunity to cure cancers. We do have the opportunity to reduce the effects of dementia. And so, what do we need to make that happen as scientists? As scientists, we need two things. Well, we need a lot more than that, but there's two that I'm going to talk about tonight. The two I'm going to talk about tonight are, first of all, we need more colleagues. We need the scientists that are going to be doing this for the next generation. As Dr. Moore said, we are in danger of losing a generation, and we can't afford to do that. We cannot afford to do that, because this is a baton race. It's a relay race, and if you drop that baton, it doesn't get picked up so easily. So we've got that to do. The second thing we need is a public that understands science, that appreciates the fact that we are living in a golden era. Because if you didn't see it over the last 3 years, you're never going to see it, that the country doesn't always understand that we are living in that golden era, doesn't always see the incredible things that are made possible by their investment through their blood, sweat, and tears. My mom and dad worked in factories, and they were never scientists. And their tax money goes to fund the science that I did and the work that many of you do. And my parents have no grudge against that. No grudge whatsoever, because they understand that there is benefit to society for the work that is being done. But if we don't have an electorate that understands and appreciates science, then we will fail. It's just a matter of time. And so those two things are two things that you, as the faculty that are going to train science teachers across this country, those are two things that you are able to provide to the scientific enterprise. And so I come to you humbly, because I recognize that I am not an educator. I'm pretty good at biochemistry, at least I was, but I'm not a teacher. It takes a special kind of expertise to be a teacher. It takes a special kind of expertise to identify the potential in a child and see it through to the time when they're standing on this stage 20 years from now. And that is something that you all have, and that you all propagate in the students that you teach. And so the AAAS, an association of scientists, is proud to be a partner with the National Science Foundation, and just as importantly, a partner with all of you in assuring that we have those two things: a scientifically literate electorate, and the next generation of scientists who are going to get that baton and who are going to go to Mars and who are going to cure disease, who are going to mitigate climate change, and who are going to lower the effects of extreme poverty. That's what you all are going to do, and we're going to do it in partnership with you. So thank you all so much for coming to Washington today to do that. Now, my real job here, after being brief, is to introduce our keynote speaker tonight. Now, unfortunately, Dr. Ladson-Billings is unable to join us because her flight was canceled, getting out of Wisconsin, I think. So, fortunately, through the wonders of technology, she's going to be able to join us in a virtual way with a recording of her presentation. And so I'm going to make that introduction now. and we're gonna turn on that video, and I know that we're not gonna get the full effect in the virtual space, but we are gonna get the profound and the informative from her, and you're going to get the brief from me. So Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings is Professor Emerita and former Kellner Family Distinguished Professor in Urban Education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Her groundbreaking research examines the pedagogical that's a hard word to say, practices of teachers who are successful with African American students. She is the author of critically acclaimed books like The Dreamkeepers, Successful Teachers of African American Children, Crossing Over to Canaan, The Journey of New Teachers in Diverse Classrooms, and Beyond the Big House, African American Educators on Teacher Education. She is the editor of 8 other books and the author of more than 100 journal articles and book chapters. She has served as the president of the National Academy of Education and the American Educational Research Association. She, because of all this, has earned numerous scholarly awards and honors, as well as honorary degrees from U.S. institutions and international institutions. And so it is my honor to introduce her keynote address on the screen. Thank you all.
Well, good evening. I am Gloria Ladson-Billings, Professor Emerita from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I'm really sorry that I can't be with you in person, but there's some things you can't control, like airlines and weather. But tonight, I want to talk to you about the notion of whether or not science education can save us. And I'm going to talk about the role of science in a post-COVID educational setting. So as I said, I am Gloria Ladson-Billings and Professor Emerita at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. That's just a fancy way of saying I'm retired, but I will tell you that I am terrible at retirement. It's just stepping down as president of the National Academy of Education, served as a fellow at the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a fellow of the British Academy, a fellow of the American Educational Research Association, and a fellow of the Hagler Institute at Texas A&M University. And that's just a brief snapshot of some of the things that I've been doing. So no, I'm not really retired. So I want to set a context for the conversation tonight. And that context has to do with what I've been calling a tale of 4 pandemics. Now, I know someone is going, 4? What does she mean? I mean, we've had our hands full with 1. Well, you're right. But I want to suggest that there is more than one pandemic that our young people, our children and our youth are facing. The first one is the obvious one, the one we know as COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2, the coronavirus. It's the one that has shut us down. It has caused us to use the term pivot probably more times than any of us has wanted to. But it's also the reason I'm able to come to you, even though I couldn't get to you, because we all figured out that we could begin to do some things remotely. So that one, I don't think I have to explain. It impacted everyone, everywhere. But here's a second one that you might be surprised. And that is the one that deals with anti-Black racism that impacted particularly people in the U.S. Now, I know that, you focus often on science, and you're saying, what do you mean pandemic? Maybe it's an epidemic, maybe it's endemic, but pandemic, I don't think so. Well, the reason that I counted among the pandemics that young people are facing is because when George Floyd was murdered, I heard from colleagues in the UK who said, oh, you think that only goes on in your country? We deal with this all the time. Look up the Stephen Lawrence case. I heard from colleagues in France who said, oh, you think you're the only folks dealing with this? Trust me, you don't want to be a Francophone or a Caribbean French-speaking person living in this country. We pushed them to the margins. We've had horrible riots. I've spoken to people in Canada who said, every time something goes wrong in the US, you guys want to run to Canada. We're not that great. Trust me. We've just dug up over 700 remains of Indigenous children. I've heard from colleagues in Australia who said we've pushed the Indigenous population of this nation all across the continent. So yes, racism is pandemic. A third pandemic is kind of trailing the coronavirus one, and that is the coming economic disaster. The fact that we are a global, interconnected society means that when people on this side of the world don't require or request goods and services, people on the other side of the world don't get to make them. So a lot of people were directly impacted economically by the coronavirus pandemic. Women in particular. Economists said that so many women left the workforce in the US. I think the number is 2.8 million. They left the workforce because they had to be caregivers for their own children. They had to be caregivers for seniors. So because there were no senior centers that were open to them. And so they had to come out of the workforce. Also because a lot of women work service-related jobs that just closed down. If you worked in a restaurant as a wait staff or a cook and the restaurant was closed, then you have a huge economic impact as a result. So again, while it was happening here, it was also happening around the world. And then the final one is one that I know I don't have to convince this group about. And that is the impending environmental catastrophe. You don't think of it as a hoax. You know that climate change is real. I often show this picture because it depicts the California fires, although this summer we've really been subject to, at least here in the upper tier of the lower 48, we've been subject to the Canadian fires. But I often use this one because my own grandchildren all live in California, and they've shared with me how bad the quality of air has been for them. So think about that. 4 pandemics that our young people are coping with. And some people might go ahead and add some others, including mental health and social and emotional ones. But telling you all of this certainly doesn't lift your spirits. It sounds like all gloom and doom. But I want to suggest to you that it's not all gloom and doom. I'm inspired by the Indian novelist Arundhati Roy, who wrote a wonderful paper, an essay called "The Pandemic is a Portal." And I want to share a bit of it for you, and I would encourage you, go online, look for it. It's not behind a paywall. You can read it for yourself. But let me just share this part of it, where she says, historically, pandemics have forced human beings to break with the past and imagine the world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or, and I think that's the operative word, or we can walk through lightly with little luggage. I love that phrase, with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So what she's suggesting to us is that the pandemic can be a place in which we can make a huge change. We can leave all of the stuff that we've been coping with behind, the pre-pandemic stuff, and start anew. So the work that I've done that most of you probably are aware of is something called Culturally Relevant Pedagogy. You probably know it from this book. This is the third edition of this book. I'm calling it the book that will never die, because back in 95, when I first wrote it, I thought I was done with it. Well, first published in 95. I thought I was done with it, but it keeps coming back. If you haven't read it, maybe you are kind of an educational research nerd like I am, and you read this article way back in 95 by that I did in the American Educational Research Journal. I want to take just a moment to kind of lay out what all the hubbub is about culturally relevant pedagogy, particularly now in this political moment where some states and districts are being told, oh, we don't want to use that term. Oh, you can't do that here. Let me try to clarify what it is I was talking about from the very beginning. So, culturally relevant pedagogy really is premised on a kind of three-tier approach. I've tried to make sure I've used an equilateral triangle to represent it. And if it's not really an equilateral triangle, don't blame me. Blame Bill Gates and the Microsoft people, because I asked for equilateral. Because I really wanted to stress that this is about equal sides, equal angles, that all three components are important. If you don't have one, then you no longer have the triangle. So what's the first one? What we've called academic achievement, or more specifically, student learning. I've modified the term academic achievement because I've learned, spending time with teachers and in schools, that when you say academic achievement, people automatically assume test scores. Now, I'm not an anti-test person, but having spent enough time in classrooms with young people, I know that they learn a lot more than we can ever test. So student learning is the broad rubric. And we really, I'll go into it a little bit more as we go along, but I just really want to point out that when I say student learning, I really am talking about the difference between what a youngster may look like in the fall when they show up in a classroom and what they look like the following spring after they've completed your class. To me, that's important. The second component is probably the most misunderstood component, cultural competence. Because I think people have an idea that cultural competence is about learning all these specific little pieces of static information about cultures, not understanding that culture is quite dynamic. And again, I'm going to talk about each of these with a little more detail. And then the third component is perhaps the least, or the most ignored, the socio-political or critical consciousness. It's what I like to call, having taught early adolescence and adolescents, the so what factor. In other words, I've learned this, so what? The critical consciousness is about how students take what they learn to solve real problems that they are coping with. So let's go through each of them individually, hopefully to be a little clearer. So I think when you say that the job of the teacher is to support student learning, you get no pushback from that. I think everybody agrees that that's important. What we don't agree on is what that should look like or what it should be. So we have this debate about depth versus coverage. I entered the field as a history teacher. So, I never got to the end of those huge US history books. And so you always picking and choosing. I think it's the same thing for those of us in the sciences. There's a lot of concepts that you want to cover. And there's, a huge science book often that you're trying to get students through. So that's a perennial dilemma for teachers. I don't think we're going to solve that. You have to make up your mind as to what you want to do. Do you want to go deep in certain areas, or do you want to be able to say, I covered all of these things? I also want us to understand, when I'm talking about student learning, I don't believe that high failure rate is the same as rigor. I mean, sometimes I think we think that, well, the reason that the students are failing the class is because, this is a very rigorous class. No, maybe the reason students are failing a class is because we're not a very good teacher. So I don't think it's any badge of honor to have lots of students failing. I think this notion of making sure we're covering a lot and not caring that some students are failing comes from a metaphor or a vision that we have often had of what it means to learn. And I use the metaphor of a sieve. In other words, we put all the kids in and we push, 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 and then just the ones that come out on the other end are the ones that are worthy. The ones that are stuck in that sieve, we kind of cast aside. We tell them things like, well, you shouldn't take more science courses. You shouldn't take more math courses. I'd like to give you another metaphor for the work that we are trying to do, and that is the metaphor of the net. Think about emergency responders. Think about firefighters. Can you imagine them leaving a fire station on their way to a fire saying, let's go see if we can save some of these people? No, emergency responders say, let's save everybody. That's their mindset. I would have loved to have been with you in person. Of course, the weather prevented it, but it makes me think of the fact that had I gone to the airport and not been able to, and gone to the gate and heard the gate attendant said, well, we have a few bad apples in the cockpit. Well, I would have turned around and gone home then too, because we have no margin for error when it comes to flying. The notion that you can have a few bad apples is not okay. I feel that same way about policing. I think if you have the privilege of carrying a weapon that means the difference between life and death, you can't have a few bad apples. The bad apples have to go. I'm crazy enough to believe we cannot have any bad apples in teaching. What did she say? Yeah, I'm crazy enough to believe that we can't excuse bad teaching. You see, like the police officer, teachers hold young people's futures. There is a difference between life and death for those futures. Now, it doesn't happen immediately like a gunshot, but it can happen. And so we are in a profession, and I know we're scrambling for teachers. We wish there were more teachers, but we've got to have teachers who are committed to the success of our young people. So student learning is all about that, about really supporting all students to learn and to learn at high levels. The second notion is cultural competence. And I'll give you kind of my textbook definition, and that is the ability to be firmly grounded in one's own culture of origin and fluent in at least one other culture. And that's very different from believing, I've got to know all about Latino culture. Oh, I've got to learn all about Black culture. Oh, I have to learn about Southeast Asia. No, you've got to learn about your own culture. What are you bringing? What influences the way you see the world? How do you make decisions? Because when you do that, you begin to understand how culture informs everything we do. If you've got some list of do's and don'ts that you do with Black kids versus what you do with Latino kids versus you're going to, first of all, be wrong. But secondly, you're going to drive yourself crazy. I live in Wisconsin, and we have the third largest migration of Hmong immigrant students, Hmong, H-M-O-N-G, Southeast Asian, mostly originating from Laos. We have 3 generations of Hmong living in Wisconsin. The first generation, born and raised in Laos, those are the grandparents. not speaking any English coming here. Second generation, born in Laos, but pretty much raised in transition, coming through Thailand and the Philippines, onto California, some of them headed on to Minnesota and Wisconsin. Those are the parents. The third generation, who we are serving in schools today, they were born here. They don't speak Hmong. And in fact, one of the most popular courses on my campus is Hmong 101, because kids want to learn how to speak to grandma. So which of these cultures are you studying? That's why I say, first, let us get grounded in our own. Our job is to help kids become fluent in at least one other. So typically, they're gaining fluency in what we see as mainstream culture, but we're not denigrating the culture they bring with them. And let me be clear, cultural competence doesn't let white students off the hook. They need to be fluent in at least one other culture beyond their own. They're not going to all live in some encapsulated white environment. If they're going into the world of science or the world of business, they're going to work with people from around the world. They're going to have to know and get to know what people experience and what they're like in these different places. So that cultural competence is one, like I said, it's misunderstood because people think it's about, oh, I need to learn what to do for you. No, you need to learn why you do what you do and accept what I am doing and be able to leverage what I'm doing as you help me gain fluency in at least one other culture. The third one, and I don't think it showed up here. Oops, I think we missed the slide. But let me just share with you. The third one is what I call socio-political or critical consciousness. As I said earlier, it's the so what factor. We teach kids all of these things, all of this information, but they don't know what to do with it. They don't know why they are learning this. And so in their own kid way, they say, well, why do we have to learn this? Or so what? What are we going to do with this? I like this socio-political or critical consciousness piece because it goes all the way back to 1787 with Thomas Jefferson explaining to James Madison that he hopes that the education of the common people will be attended to because we are depending on them for some due degree of liberty. You can tell I'm a history nerd, right? That sounds like an, okay. So he said it, but he said it in 1787. And why is that important? Because in 1787, nobody cared about common people and their schooling. They didn't go to school. In 1787, if you were one of the common people, you did what your parents did. Your dad was a farmer, you're going to be a farmer. If your mom was a seamstress, you learned to be a seamstress. If your dad was a candle maker, you were going to be a candle maker. Maybe your dad's a farmer, got 6 kids, 4 of them are already going to be farmers. Dad says to the candle maker down the street, can you teach my kid how to do this candle making stuff? That's how we used to do it. And here comes Jefferson with this radical notion that everybody, not just the rich, because at that time, that's who got educated. They sent the rich to New England. They sent them to Europe. Jefferson said, no, I hope we will attend to the education of the common people. So, what does all this have to do with Arundhati Roy and the portal and dealing with all these pandemics? Well, I'm sure you recognize this because all of you have one. You have one whether you wanted to have one or not. And as you know, they don't always work the way we want them to. They are machines. They break or they do wonky things. And we try to do a few things to fix them. You know, we may pull the battery out and put it back in. We may pull a SIM card out and put it back in. We may shut it off and turn it back on. You know, if we're ambitious, we may even go to our laptops and see if we can find a support group to tell us what to do. But if none of that works, we make our way down to that cell phone provider. Typically somebody who looks all of 17 and wearing a t-shirt shows up to help us. And I'm not being disparaging. That's who's there. And they actually know what they're doing. And they may try some of the very same things that you try. And then they say these words: I think it's time for a hard reset. Well, if you're like me, that's the kiss of death. Why? Because I'm terrible at backing up my phone. So if they reset it, you're about to lose all of those food pictures that you took. You're going to lose all those selfies. You're going to lose all of those contacts. That's why, you get messages from your friends. I got a new phone. Can you give me your contact information? We're going to lose all of that, because what happens when we reset, we wipe it clean. You get back a phone that's a lot like it was when you got it from the factory, and you start again. That, to me, is Arundhati Roy's admonition, that we can reset. We don't have to keep building on what we have. We can start again. I'm someone who has said over and over, when we're in the midst of the pandemic and people say, "Oh God, I can't wait till we get back to normal." I'm like, no, I don't want to get back to normal, because normal was where a lot of problems were for a lot of kids. Normal was the place where only certain kids got to AP or honors. Normal was the place where the same old kids kept getting suspended. Normal was when the same old kids ended up in remediation or were told, no, you can't take the biology class. You need to take just the general science class. So the reset is the metaphor that I want you to hold in your head about what we should and could be doing. Now, I wish I could tell you that I thought of this on my own, but I want to be honest here. And it really comes from some lessons that I learned from history. On the right-hand side of your screen, you see a picture from post-World War II Japan. After the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, when they were trying to regroup, get their kids back in school, Japan made some very big changes. First and foremost, they expanded educational opportunities for girls. If you've been to Japan, you know it's a very gendered society and girls don't have lots of opportunities. But they actually did begin to open up some things for them in the post-World War II era. The other thing they did is they looked to the West, because Japan schools were what we would consider kindergarten through about 8th grade, and then 9th through 12th grade. They had elementary schools and they had secondary schools. They looked to the West and said, oh, they're doing something here in the middle. What today we call middle schools, back then probably was a junior high school, but in the minds of the Japanese educators, they were like, wow, there's something about early adolescence that we're missing. And so they began to do that. They reset their organization. On the left-hand side of the screen, you're seeing a picture from Reggio Emilia, perhaps the most well-known, highly regarded preschool in the world. So highly regarded that we still here at Wisconsin send early childhood education candidates to Reggio Emilia so they can see it. Because the Italians also in this post-World War II era, on the losing side, said, we don't ever want to be in a place where our kids, that we're raising a group of citizens that won't think for themselves. Interesting now, given some of the more fascist tendencies that are popping up again. But Reggio Emilia was always set up to have kids begin to think for themselves. So in this picture, you see a little child trying to solve a problem. You don't have the adults solving it for him. They're watching him problem solve. So those are where the lessons from history came for me. So I want to suggest to you that we have been working on what post-COVID education could be. And so I would urge you, if you have a moment, to go to the National Academy of Education, where we have on our website a whole series of reports around post-COVID educational inequities around reading, mathematics, special education, and social emotional learning, where we've tried to look at, okay, what's happened, what needs to change. So those are good summaries of the kinds of issues that we're all coping with. So Arundhati Roy's quote has a wonderful word in there, and that word is imagine. So let's go back to that word. What if we imagine that we did not return to separate, isolated learning of subject areas? Wow. What? You mean we're not just going to have this as reading time? Or we're not going to just have this as math time? And then maybe a couple days a week in elementary school, we'll have some science time? What if we took a cue from the fact that we live in a scientific, highly technological society? Everything about the way we do school suggests that we are farmers or factory workers. Farmers, because the kids are all home now, right? In harvesting, planting a crop. Think about that. We're working on an agrarian calendar in a factory model, 1920s factory model. And we're in 2023, in the most scientific, highly technological society the world has ever seen. And what if we drew from that? What if we paid attention to youth culture as a site for teaching and learning? One of the terms I don't like that has come out of the COVID era is learning loss. I never use it because I know a little bit about the brain. Our kids didn't lose learning. Those cognition was going on. They were continuing to learn. They lost opportunities. They lost those opportunities that then show up on tests as not having performed well, but they were learning. And so what if we paid attention to the culture that they are producing and participating in as a site for teaching and learning? And then what if we position science? Oh my God, this is really radical. I should have a bunch of governors in arms, right? Because I want to position science as the main point of entry into the curriculum. I know that our students need to be able to read. I know they need to be able to compute. But they live in a world that they're immersed in scientific enterprise. Everywhere they turn, they have these devices that have come to us because somebody understood about silicon and silicon chips and transmission and all that kind of stuff. But we act as if they don't need to know that. So if I were there with you, I could see your hands because I'd ask this question: how many of you have seen the movie Black Panther? That probably also add on Wakanda Forever. This was a blockbuster. Everybody saw this movie. And even if you as an adult didn't see it, trust me, your kids saw it. Because it's part of the Marvel series. Kids love those characters. They knew those characters before they even got to the theater. They knew about the Black Panther. And so let's start there, and then let's ask this question. What are the STEAM elements of this film? And note, I said STEAM, not STEM, because I think without the arts, we are missing so many kids. Every scientist I know is an artist, and every artist I know is a scientist. And so again, we need not fragment these ideas. So as you look at this film, where's the science in the film? Where's the technology? It's very tech rich, right? Where's the engineering? There's a lot of engineering. Where's the art? It is artistically amazing. Where's the math? Okay. Those kinds of questions get us in a place where our kids begin to think about, I do kind of like this science stuff. Or how about this? How many of you know about Henrietta Lacks? I gave a talk once in, I guess it's the Knowles Foundation, and those are all science teachers in New Jersey. And I asked this question, and nobody knew about Henrietta Lacks. And then I said, how many people know about HeLa cells? Everybody's hand went up. HeLa cells, Henrietta Lacks, Hela, all right? The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, where this woman who developed cancer was treated at Johns Hopkins, and they discovered that those cancer cells that were in her body, in her womb actually, could grow outside of her body. And that they'd not seen that before. And so many of our medical advances come from the use of those cells. So one of the questions you might ask is, well, what do Black Panther and Henrietta Lacks have in common? Well, first and foremost, they have a compelling narrative. There's a story there. Students don't just want to learn isolated facts and pieces of information that don't have much to do with them. They want to know, what's the story behind this? They also have a way to humanize what we think of as the STEM field. Because a lot of times our students think this is outside of them. This has nothing to do with them. When I was talking about the socio-political or the critical consciousness, I'm reminded of the time I went into a school and these kids were working so hard on saving the rainforest. And I asked them, where's the rainforest? And they said, we don't know. And I said, well, why are you working on this? And they said, this is what she wants to do, pointing to their teacher. We talk about socio-political or critical consciousness. These are questions and concerns and problems that kids have, not us foisting our problems or the things we think are the problems on them. And then the third thing I think that these two issues have in common is a way to connect students, as a way for us to connect with students' lives and their experiences. We get to see these films, we get to read these books, we also get to show, well, what is it about this that is similar in your life or your experience? So I talked about maybe what if we were able to situate science as the center of the curriculum. Now, I know that's a radical notion because we're so caught up in the old way. Remember the dead skies and the dead rivers, the smoky skies, and the dead rivers and all of that stuff. We still want to bring that back post-pandemic. So, for example, what if we ask the question, what does migration mean for species? That's just the general question. Well, in the sciences, that's just putting that in our laps, right? Because we talk about things like genetic variation and adaptation and pandemics and vaccines. We might talk about Linnaeus or environmental impact. There's so much we could talk about when we say, what does migration mean for species? But in math, we could talk about how do you predict population growth when you have these migrations or dispersals. I mean, human beings are always moving, always. And so what does that migration mean for predicting a mathematical model, right? In history and social studies, we talk about great migrations, those from Europe to the US. We talk about those from the South to the North and the West. Maybe you're reading something like Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns. Just asking the kids, how long has your family been in this part of the country? Where else did they come from? Being well aware that for some children, particularly African-American children, there's only so far back they can go. I can go back 4 generations. Can't go back any further than that. I can go back to my mother, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, and my great-great-grandparents on my mother's side, Leah and Peter Sims, who were born in the 1840s. Which means they were born into slavery. I can't go back further than that. But that's an interesting conversation to have. Notion of internal migration, that is things like whether you want to call it urban renewal or gentrification, all of that falls under social studies. In English, maybe studying the Grapes of Wrath or My Antonia or Brown Girl, Brown Stones, or a favorite book of mine is The Late Homecomer, which is a story of a Hmong woman telling the story of her parents' traverse from Laos to Minnesota, to California, to Minnesota. And of course, in the music and art, there are ways in which we think about what that migration might look like and what we could do with it. I want to leave you with a couple of examples because it's one thing for me to talk to you about this, but you ought to see it. You ought to see what young people are doing and how they're doing it, because this is just not a pipe dream. I did this research because I spent time in classrooms watching it being done. So this first one is an example of a student who was very interested in the problem of climate change. And you will see all three components. You will see that he's developed some learning. It will come through. You will also see that he's very culturally competent because he situates it in his own neighborhood and community. And there is a socio-political or critical consciousness because he's raising a question about the disparity between temperature in the inner city versus in suburban communities. So take a look at this.
Neighborhoods are ovens with windows. And as the knob on global warming increases, lives are preheated until a soul souffles. Pancake stack projects are poured over with a humid as thick as molasses. Heat and humidity are the perfect appetizer on death's plate. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet from May to October, and senior citizen discount is every day. If thermometers can measure temperatures, they should be able to measure human anxiety. As the temperature rises, we reach boiling points. Attitudes of those around us rise quicker than mercury, and the pressure of staying cool causes us to explode. Compressed living complexes circulate heat and cause compressed feelings to converge upon our neighbors in the hood. So that 90% release of excess body heat talked about in science class is contributed to our local temperature rising. We crack open fire hydrants until we hear lights crying, raising taxes by lowering our body temperature. And if you couldn't afford a wind replacer, fridges and freezers were propped open until your two brothers' faces are frozen. Audiences applaud the ice cream man once that familiar jingle mingles with our ears. This sweet release of flooded heat is a godsend. But what do you know? The ice cream vendor's name is Noah. As the temperature rises, so do attitudes, death rates, bills, and ice cream stocks. Heat affects the elderly more than it does us. Their lungs resemble the Dow Exchange, rises and drops until they crash. Ambulances are summoned, riding down the street flooded with the contents of the only fire hydrant. And we have only just begun to fry.
Now, full disclosure, I have to tell you, I love this particular video because I actually got a chance to teach this young man and work with him as he developed this project. Could have asked him for a 20-page paper, right? Just write me a paper about climate change. But he took his own interest in spoken word and performance skills and weaved it into something that is now being used by PBS Wisconsin on their education site. I would also like to tell you that Elijah did complete a degree at the University of Wisconsin in environmental sciences. And he works with climate scientists. On the weekend, he still does spoken word. But that's the kind of thing that will ensure that our kids are engaged in this work. I'm going to show you one more example, this time of also of a high school student, one of Christopher Emden's Science Genius students. So let's just take a look at Jabari on this.
Fifth group, actually it's not a group, it's an individual. He's representing Harlem, Urban Assembly School for the Performing Arts. Come on up and do it, man.
What's up with it? Drop that, sound guy. I'm about to tell y'all a little something about work and kinetic energy, all right? So clap your hands for me, please. Check. Yo, yeah, this concept is applied to all lives. We stride times distance, be a witness to the prize. Be a man, understand you comprehending this is vital. Work equals FD, the equation for survival. Your only rival is friction, don't get caught up in the drag. You better prepare, cause obstacles fight back. When you get knocked down, no, please don't cry. Just get up and apply more force next time. One day, I was dreaming with a really strong hope that I'll make it, but to make it takes more than just believing. These resistance/demons were kinda holding me back, and I let them, but the simple way to get me on track was force times this place is work, no debate. I'll take that concept, apply it to my mistakes, and now I'm progressing, a natural rap genius. I'ma get an A if I see this on the regen. Here's a lesson, I know it kinda hurts, but if you truly wanna work, then there must be progression, cause FD equals W's the rule, and the unit measurement for the product is called joules. Cool, I did the work, I'ma try to let it flow. The more people I know, kinetic energy grows, so I'ma go to work, convert all of my potential, and as my speed increases, then I'ma grow exponential. The work has been applied, if my equations are correct, the energy that is left creates a domino effect. My mass is what I'm bringing to the table, underestimate your wish that you had brought a bigger dinner plate. Separate me from the fakes, let me educate. Velocity's my following, and that's what I'ma generate. Through these shows and gigs, just overcoming all the friction to the point where friction doesn't even make a difference. I feed my interest with the laws of physics. When M and V multiplies, the picture is painted vivid. The work was just something that got me inside the door. Now we squaring the V and it's exponentially more. I got a lot in store for the V's, cause I'm progressing my M. And when you multiply them, there's no end to the kinetic energy. You better be prepared. Filling you up with envy with my 1FMB squared. Yo, here's a lesson. I know it kinda hurts, but if you truly wanna work, then there must be progression, cause FD equals W's the rule, and the unit measurement for the product is called joules. Cool, I did the work, I'ma try to let it flow. The more people I know, kinetic energy grows, so I'ma go to work, convert all of my potential, and as my speed increases, then I'ma go exponential.
Jabari won that contest competing against 14 other high schools in New York. When we first met him, what he said to us was, "I'm not college material." When we got him working on a concept that he learned in the physics class, FD equals W, he was able to make it an artistic. Remember I said all scientists are artists and all artists are scientists? He was able to use his artistic skills in developing his presentation for the Science Genius rap battles. At the end of this contest, Jabari went ahead and applied to Hunter College and was admitted. Jabari is now a graduate of Hunter College and comes back each year to his high school, Urban Assembly for the Performing Arts, to encourage and support other young people. Question that I began the presentation with is, can science education save us? And I'm convinced it may be the only thing that can. Thank you, and I appreciate your patience and your willingness to listen. Goodbye.